Hey guys, welcome back for the next video. Glad you clicked on it. To start off, a bit of a rant session. Y'all will definitely know what I'm talking about if you've been around YouTube a lot. A lot of the time, unspecialized YouTube channels will try to give their take on what languages are easiest or hardest to learn, some of them specifying that they're only talking about for English speakers, other times not. I ain't gonna call out anyone in particular, but I've seen a lot of them, and none of them are universal, and I've pretty much never found videos that I agree with, and they get a lot of the facts wrong. So I'm gonna put all that to rest today. This video isn't a list of languages that are easy or hard to learn. Rather, I'll present a list of linguistic attributes in order from shouldn't worry you to this is actually what makes a language harder. So here we go. The first aspect of learning a language is writing systems overall, this being what letters make what sounds, how the system operates, so on. Learning a new writing system is nowhere near as hard as people make it seem. In fact, this is the easy part. This is a major discrepancy between the opinions of people with no experience in learning foreign languages and the insight of people who've spent years on the grind. I can use Russian as a good example for this. Russian isn't an easy language by any stretch of the imagination. It has tons of moving parts in nearly every part of speech. Russian has 6 noun cases, 3 genders, adjectives that fit the case, gender, and number, and verbs that have a dual infinitive system depending on its aspect. But what do most non-Russian speakers complain about regarding learning it? Oh, the alphabet seems hard. It's so difficult to read Russian. The language is useful, but like, different script, not for me. Come on, guys! Learning to read the Cyrillic alphabet is literally the easiest part about learning Russian. It took me like 1 calendar day, even living my life normally and just looking at the Omniglot page when I had a minute or two, to be able to phonetically sound out words. Learning to actually write coherent sentences in Russian took like 6 more months, and conversation in Russian is admittedly still a work in progress for me. Outside of that, learning the Arabic abjad took me about 2 weeks, or as long as it took me to let go of my 15-year-old ego and use a little kid song on YouTube to learn the abjad. After that, I was good. I've also been recently learning Amharic. That language is written in the abugida, sometimes also called an alpha-syllabary. That script took me roughly the same amount of time to learn, even though I did it without toddler music. Even then, abugidas have a system to them, making the massive amount of characters easier to handle. Even learning a pure syllabary is one drop in the ocean of any foreign language. Logographies, of course, are a different story. They're more of a vocabulary in themselves than a writing system. The big picture, though, is that if writing systems scare you, the rest of this video may as well be a horror film. The next part of learning a language is listening comprehension. Now, don't get me wrong, this is my personal biggest struggle with learning languages. Native speakers of any language speak so fast, especially with each other, at times it seems impossible to understand that kind of conversation as an L2 speaker. So why is it so low on this list? Because, unlike most of the other stuff I'll talk about today, listening comprehension isn't that much easier or harder for different languages. There are minor factors that make it harder, like the presence of tones or 2 or more sounds that are really similar to you, but overall it just comes down to how much you hear the language. Listening comprehension is a challenge, but it's not that much of a bigger challenge for some languages than others. Most languages require roughly the same amount of work here, therefore it's not a huge difficulty factor. Next up, and also not creating a huge difference between languages for difficulty, is their phonemes and phonotactics. This is a fancy way of saying the sounds that exist and how they combine. It's no secret that certain languages have sounds that are more difficult to make, depending on how many of those sounds your native language has. Unless you're a literal toddler, hey what's up young viewers, glad you'll get in this knowledge even though y'all haven't reached the age of being bad at languages just yet. Foreign phonemes are hard, especially vowels, since there's technically an infinite number of them, and knowing how close you are to the ones in your target language is nearly impossible. I admit this is a part of languages that takes extra talent, but if you have a good ear, it can be made much easier. Taking somewhat of the middle ground on difficulty is grammar. In this category is macro grammar, the overarching rules on how a language functions, its cases, adjective agreements, and verb conjugations in general. We'll save the exceptions for later. Grammar isn't that easy, but it's not that hard either. Some languages have harder grammar than others, that's no lie. But as a whole, a language's grammatical constitution is just a set of rules that will always be at hand. Because of that, they're very hard to forget, and therefore not very difficult once you stick with a language for a matter of time. Remember earlier when I said that writing systems aren't that hard to learn? Well, that's still true, but the presence of exceptions in the writing system will make language significantly harder to learn. English, of course, is a commonly used model for this, as English orthography is absolutely full of exceptions. English isn't the only one, though. I'm starting to learn Danish now, and their orthography is loaded with exceptions, especially regarding vowels that make multiple sounds, but still not as bad as English. Other phonetic attributes not represented in writing can also make a language hard to learn. These are things like Amharic not representing consonant gemination and Russian not representing stress while being a mobile stressed language. All this makes the languages harder than languages that don't have this because learning how to actually pronounce stuff takes extra effort and Googling, and it's just difficult. The presence of grammatical exceptions takes the second highest place of factors that make foreign languages hard to learn. Some languages have more grammatical exceptions than others. This is even true when you account for the fact that different languages have their grammatical exceptions in different areas. For example, Hebrew has a noticeable amount of exceptions on pluralizing nouns, but much less than anything else, while Arabic has absolute truckloads of the same kind of exceptions. The exceptions are the rule in this case, while the Romance languages are fairly consistent with their noun pluralization, but have a lot of exceptions in verb conjugations. The amount of grammatical exceptions that a language has is really hard to deal with because it upends the predictable patterns that make languages easier. Add on to this that it takes away a learner's confidence when they try to talk, because they keep feeling like they're going to run into an exception that they don't know and sound bad. Quick PSA, if you accidentally say a regular form of the word when it should be irregular, natives will still understand you. It's completely fine. Since exceptions make language learning difficult, imagine how hard the category where everything is an exception makes learning. The single biggest determining factor of language difficulty is vocabulary. Specifically, how much of the target language's vocabulary is shared with your native language or with any other languages that you already know. This factor is the most important for determining how difficult a language is because vocabulary barely follows any rules within a language and it certainly doesn't care what the same word is in some other language. A good example of how this works is that despite English being a Germanic language, if you speak English and nothing else, the Romance languages are the easiest to learn. Why? Because English actually has more Romance vocabulary than Germanic vocabulary. This is especially the case with specialized vocabulary, which helps a lot if you need to reconstruct a word that you've never heard in the target language that could have a cognate form. The Romance languages are much more reliable to do this in for native English speakers than the Germanic languages. This completely overrides the fact that English's grammar is almost completely Germanic. There are certain other factors at hand, but I don't want to focus too closely on these specific language combinations. Going back to a more overall view about learning vocabulary, if you're learning a language that has, say, 70% lexical similarity to either your native language or to another language you know, learning vocabulary is easy there because you're only learning 30% of the words from scratch. On the other hand, if you learn a language from a completely new language family, you'll have to learn nearly everything from scratch, and that will take a long time. This is compounded by the inevitable slow start due to having no familiarity with how words are formed in the target language, and this is really frustrating, just trust me. Memorizing vocabulary is easily the most time-consuming and tedious part of learning any language, so the more it can cut down on itself, the easier and less stressful that language will be. To recap the order, from least effect on difficulty to the most. Writing systems are seriously overfeared by inexperienced learners. Then, listening comprehension is a challenge, but not that much more so for some languages than others. Next, pronunciation difficulty depends far more on the learner than on the language. Up next, grammar can be difficult, but it happens everywhere within a language, so regardless of how hard, grammar can be absorbed well. Following that, writing exceptions are frustrating and can make any learner sound funny when they try to pronounce words. After that, grammatical exceptions are a hassle to anyone just trying to follow grammar. Finally, vocabulary takes a long time to learn, but a lot longer if you have to learn all the words for the first time. All of these factors, especially the vocabulary, impact different languages differently, so there are really no right or wrong answers to what the easiest and hardest languages are. It depends on what languages any individual knows. And since there are almost 7,000 languages spoken on the planet and an uncertain number of language families, probably around 30 to 50 or so, plus language isolates, the single hardest language to learn may be one you've never heard of. Thanks for watching.